There will come a moment in time when the person you always cared for, the one who was always there for you, is suddenly gone. And in the silence that follows, you realize that there was one thing no one warned you about, and that is now that that person is gone, you don't know how to take care of yourself. For most of us, that person will be a spouse or a partner. For me, it was my mother because I had never married, and my mother and I began living together after my father died. And we lived together for about 20 years. And then my mother returned to Florida to her friends, and I moved to Breckenridge, Colorado. And she was so happy there. And I was happy in Breckenridge. And then she fell while she was living alone. And she went into a rehab center. And when she came out of the rehab center, she could no longer live alone. And so I brought her to Colorado to live with me, and that was the last year of her life. And I spent the last 3 weeks of her life sleeping next to her bed. We set up a hospital bed in my living room, and I was with her when she passed. And I can tell you honestly, for the first year that she was gone, I felt like I was sleepwalking through that year. And at the same time, I had to make so many decisions because, as I said, I didn't know how to take care of myself, and suddenly the person who had always been my sounding board was no longer there. I'll give you an example, and it's a small and silly one, but I hated driving at night. In fact, I don't drive at night anymore because I just can't see very well at night. But the few times that I drove at night when I lived in Colorado, I would call my mother, and she would talk to me the whole drive home. Just, chit chat. How's your day going? What are your neighbors doing? That sort of thing. It was just lovely, just casual chit chat. But she knew that I was nervous, and so she would just stay on the phone with me, and it would be like 30 minutes of talking. But that's who she was to me. She was my best friend. She was the center of my world. And I had to learn how to take care of myself and how to stand on my own 2 feet without that center of my world being there anymore. And that was terribly difficult for me. And I had to make a lot of big decisions, like selling a house and finding a new place to live. And I had to do all of that on my own, and I was scared to death. I needed to downsize so that I could afford a home that I could live in. I was 60 years old, and I knew that I would have to work a few more years until I could retire. And so I needed to make a lot of important decisions. I couldn't live in Colorado anymore because, quite honestly, I was priced out of the market there. I couldn't afford to live there. And so I moved here to this little home in a northwestern corner of North Carolina It's a very rural area that I live in. It's 30 minutes to the nearest grocery store. And I bought the house sight unseen. I had a realtor and she made a really good video of the inside and outside of the house and the drive up to the house so that I could see it. And, but I never saw the house in person until I had already purchased it and moved in. The day I moved in was the first day I drove up here. So that was a very unusual way to do things, but it thankfully worked. And I've never lived in a rural area before. I grew up in Fort Lauderdale and then lived in Colorado. And so I lived in New York for a short time. So I always lived in very busy, popular places. And it's very different living in a rural area. So I had a lot to learn. And the person who would have guided me in the past was no longer here. So I did a lot of praying that first year, and I still do. And I can tell you that I believe that God was with me. And I don't want this to sound like one of those, hearing voices, that kind of preachy thing. But I do want to honestly say that I prayed every single day, many times a day, asked for guidance, asked to be shown the right way to go and where to go. And I believe God brought me here. And I'm so glad he did, because I love this little area. I love my community. I had to learn to meet new people, and the people I've met have been wonderful and kind. I found a new church. I'm really blessed with wonderful neighbors who are just similar to me in age and just very kind and generous people. And so if you're watching this and you're in the middle of starting over, whether it's because of a death in the family or a divorce, I want you to know that I see you and I understand you. And most importantly, God sees you and understands you. And I hope you'll leave a comment below and just tell me what you're going through at this time of season in your life. So it's been 3 years since I moved here, and I just turned 64. And what I have learned is that I can take care of myself. Hasn't been easy. My life is a lot smaller than it was in the past. It's very modest. The house I live in is much smaller than the house I lived in before. I'll be working a few more years before I can retire. I won't be doing the things I've done in the past. I can't afford to. But I want to tell you something. And it's something that I'm going to talk about in a future video. I am more content now than I've ever been in my life. I'm happier now than I've ever been in my life. Even though I have so much less than I ever had. I drive a 10-year-old car now. I used to lease Mercedes. How foolish was that? The things that I used to think mattered, I discovered don't matter at all. So, this is what I want you to know if you're going through the same thing. God said, I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. I used to repeat that verse for 30 years and say, I don't know what you mean, God, everything's the same. Now I do. It's a lesser life, a smaller life, a quieter life. But I'm so much happier. I'm so content. And every single day, I thank God for bringing me here to this moment. And I say, I am not alone. God is with me. God brought me here, and God will sustain me as He has up until now. So, God bless you. And leave me a comment below. Tell me about the season you're in too.